You know, sometimes you make very intentional, conscious trade-offs. You know that this is the cost of this thing, but you are building for the now. You don't want to spend weeks building something, right, that does not have that value right now. Maybe it's going to be useful 3 years down the line, but 3 years down the line, you can build it. Maybe if you did not do those things because of the sensitive nature, especially if you're working at a startup, right? If you don't do those things and ship those things now, you might not get to that point where you're actually in that thing in 3 years. So you need to be conscious of you need to know that you are actually making this trade-off, right? And then decide if you want to make that trade-off or if it is more important for you to actually solve that problem now. Build systems that can, solve the problem and withstand any kind of failure. Parts of the system will fail, but when that happens, you still need to make sure that your system does what it needs to do and it does it to the level that it needs to do that at, right? If you want users to be able to buy stuff on Amazon, then I should be able to buy stuff on Amazon, regardless of whatever is happening. You actually need to enjoy tech for you to, spend time, learning different things and stuff. I think you need to enjoy it. What a mentor needs to do for you at that time is to let you know that, okay, this is what career looks like if this is what you focus on. This is what career looks like if you focus on this other thing. You get to learn those practical things. You can build anything you want to build, but know that, okay, this is what is important if you want to go in this direction.
Mono, with your summer internships, you are hiring a lot of juniors at a time where it feels like many people are giving up on juniors. What would you say that Mono is seeing that other orgs aren't seeing?
In general, right, people are building stuff and, they want people that already have the experience to do this thing. But then there is a limit, right, to that. People become senior, grow into other roles or leave the country and go work somewhere else, stuff like that. And then you have very few people with that experience. You actually make a post for a senior level role, but you get a lot of applications from people that are not so senior. So it makes sense to kind of adjust your expectations. Know that there is a very big pool of junior level talent. And what that means is you have to, adjust your hiring pipeline to actually build that talent, right, into the seniors that you want them to be eventually.
What are some of the other things that you're typically looking for?
The first thing is you must be a curious person. And how do you show that? How do you show that you're a curious person? It's in how many things you have tried. It doesn't have to be a full-blown project, but you are constantly learning these things, applying your new knowledge, right, that you're gaining over time. So the other thing is, humility. And the way I define humility in this context is knowing that you don't know a lot of things, acknowledging that. And then the last thing is passion. You must have, I feel like the best juniors that I have hired, right, were very passionate people. So how much do you know already is very important. But something that is more important than that is that passion for learning. That this person is going to do all it takes to learn whatever. It's more important than whatever this person already knows.
Hey there, and welcome to another episode of The Craft, where we learn from senior leaders about the mindsets, mentor models, and systems that shape how they work and lead. I'm Emmy, and I'm the creator and host. Our crafter for today is Ahmad Alfawwaz Temei, who is a software engineering manager at Mono, where he leads the teams responsible for financial integrations across Africa's banking and fintech ecosystem. His work spans architecting secure financial systems, driving engineering excellence, and building high-reliability systems that power Mono Connect, Direct Pay, and other mission-critical infrastructure. Before becoming a software engineering manager, Alfawwaz was a reverse engineer at Mono, where he worked on dissecting bank and fintech applications to enable stable, secure open banking integrations. He later became engineering lead for financial services, overseeing the evolution of Mono's integration layer before stepping into management. Today, we talked about why Mono continues to double down on hiring junior talent and what he typically looks for when reviewing applications, mentorship and its role in your career growth as an engineer, how he holds himself and his team accountable in a fast-paced startup environment, how to make hard but necessary trade-offs, some of the skills that have driven his growth up until this moment. As you go through the episode, feel free to drop a comment to let me know your favorite parts. Subscribe so you know when new episodes drop, and share it with a professional in your network who might benefit from the conversation. Thanks for tuning in and enjoy.
Alfawwaz, thank you. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks, Yumika.
All right. Jumping right into it. So I'm going to start at the top and, something that Mono has been doing for a while now, which is your summer internships, right?
Mhm.
Every time I see application for a summer internships, I share them in numbers because I do want, I hope that people will, take advantage of it. Right now, Mono, with your summer internships, you are hiring a lot of juniors at a time where it feels like many people are giving up on juniors, right? A lot of, the job descriptions that you read, they say they need multiple years of experience, and we continue to have more and more juniors. What would you say that Mono is seeing that other orgs aren't seeing?
In general, right, like many times people are building stuff and, they want people that already like have the experience to do this thing, right? But then there is a limit, right, to that. Like people become senior, grow into like other roles or leave the country and go work somewhere else, stuff like that, right? And then you have like very few people with that experience, right? You actually make a post for a senior level role, but you get a lot of applications from people that are not so senior, right? So it makes sense to kind of like adjust your expectations, right? Know that there is a very big pool of junior level talent, right? And what that means is you have to, you know, adjust your hiring pipeline to actually build that talent, right, into the seniors that you want them to be eventually. I mean, that's not saying that you give up entirely on hiring seniors, but having that pipeline gives you talent that develops context over time, because a senior coming in is coming in with like a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience from somewhere else, but they need to learn, you know, what your company does and how your company does things and all of this stuff, right? That's They need to learn that regardless, right, of how many years of experience they have and all of that. But a junior that you train from, that you train, right, like that you raise, you develop in house, right? This person is also going to be learning these things as they grow, right? And if you are very strategic about the kind of juniors that you hire, they're going to grow very fast, right? Like they're going to be able to do these things that you need people to do, right? It means that you don't have to have as many senior level talent as you probably would have thought initially. So just having that, I think that that's what Mono has, kind of like realized, right? And I'll say that it's something that we learned over time. So I joined Mono as a reverse engineer, and reverse engineering is very rare. It's very difficult to hire a senior level reverse engineer, like very difficult. And it got to a point, it was like, okay, how exactly are we going to do this thing? Because I'm the only one on the team and I need, I can't be the only one, doing this thing, right? So um Abdul said, okay, we would need to like, develop talents. We need to like train people to do that. And, I was kind of skeptical, but I had done it before, right? Like help people grow, at other companies. So it was like, okay, sure, we can try, but I don't know if we're going to be able to like really make it work, right? But then when you hire the right juniors, then it means that you're hiring someone who is like very curious, very passionate, right? I think that the three most important things would be like, you need to have like a lot of curiosity, a lot of passion, and a lot of humility, right? You need to know that you don't know a lot of things, right? And you must be ready to learn. If you hire someone with those qualities and you create the environment for them to learn, they're going to learn very fast and they're going to contribute, right?
Mm.
And that's why we do it.
Right. Thank you so much for that. So you've touched on, two things. One is the things that you look out for when you hire folks. And I do have questions to dig into that a bit more. But it looks like Mono is basically anticipating needs for more senior, more technical folks that you're anticipating that. But instead of taking out of the ecosystem, which will probably leave anyway, because, they might land bigger opportunities and, move and all of that, instead of, out of the ecosystem, you're trying to build that in the ecosystem. I think that's, something that's really, really important for us. You've just shared a bit about, the things that you look out for in engineers, and not maybe you also hire outside of engineering. And especially right now, it's even hard as well for juniors to land these roles, right? So we've talked about how you need curiosity, you do need the willingness to learn. But in this age where there's lots of tools and AI technology, it means that is an exciting time. So you can do many things, right? That you can't before. But it's also an overwhelming time, which means many people are trying to do many things at your level. Right, so it's very, very competitive. How might someone who wants to get into Mono sort of differentiate themselves? What are things that you are typically looking for? Outside, I think you mentioned curiosity and willingness to learn. What are some of the other things that you're typically looking for?
Okay. So yeah, the first thing is you must be a curious person. Like that's uh if you and how do you show that? Like how do you show that you're a curious person? It's in how many things you have tried, you know? You must be someone that's constantly like trying new stuff, learning things, building out stuff. It doesn't have to be like a full blown project, it doesn't have to be. But you are constantly like learning these things, applying your new knowledge, right, that you gain in over time. And there's like a record of that, right? That's very important. So the other thing is, humility. And the way I define humility in this context is knowing that you don't know a lot of things, acknowledging that. So it is one thing to be curious and want to learn, right? It's another thing to actually recognize that there is so much that you don't know. You know, I feel like growing there's this meme, right? Like I think it's like to this shape where there's like the peak of stupidity of some or something, and then the valley of despair before the peak of enlightenment, right? I feel like it's like that for many people. I mean, I can say it was definitely like that for me because there was definitely a time that, I felt like I could definitely do anything, right? And, it was a thing of knowing that I can learn anything, like kind of know that I can learn anything. So I can definitely do anything, right? But, I hadn't seen enough to know just how much I did not actually know yet. You understand? So, so yeah, like, I mean, I had the humility to like keep learning and stuff, but many people get stuck at that point, you know? Don't seek out continuous learning, like continuous development, learning stuff, learning how to do things better, that you learn new things, but you also learn how to do the things that you already know better. That's like uh how I think that people should, like as a junior engineer, you should like have that drive, have that humility, right? To acknowledge that. And then the last thing is passion. Like you must have, I feel like the best juniors that I have hired, right, were very passionate people. And it's a thing I kind of like learned over time that sometimes passion is a stronger thing to look out for than existing skill. So, how much do you know already is very important, right? But something that is more important than that is that passion for learning, right? That this person is going to like do all it takes to learn whatever, right? It's more important than whatever this person already knows. Because especially at the junior level, you don't really know a lot anyway. But if you are the kind of person that would go out of your way to like learn anything, regardless of what it takes, then you're going to go a lot further than someone who has learned some things but maybe like doesn't move fast. Kind of like is getting stuck in that area, right? Maybe learning a few more things, but at a much slower pace, right? That fire is not there. The passion to actually keep it going.
Hmm. So as a sort of as an extension or as a follow-up question to that, so you just mentioned, humility, curiosity, and passion,
Mhm.
right? One of the things that I do know for sure that juniors don't have, especially if they are not already working in an organization, is I guess mentorship, right? So there's one where you are doing things, to build projects, to build your portfolio. But there's another side where it's like you're doing things and you're doing them rightly. It's in the way that, your brain is probably getting sharpened. How would you say a junior might be able to think about that? Or would you say, at the stage where you are still entry level, you're experimenting, it doesn't really matter as much? The level of taste or the level of craft that you apply to this work. What matters more is actually that you're doing it. How would you think they should think about that?
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so you've mentioned a few things. First, mentorship, right? I'll say that good mentorship is something that it's a catalyst, right? It's like you have a good mentor, you have all the qualities of being, a teachable person, a curious person, you're always trying stuff, but you have a good mentor that offers guidance, right? And I feel like that guidance is the important thing for shaping your career and ensuring that, you don't spend too much time wasting time, right? So I feel like very early on, engineers should, like as a junior engineer, you should try stuff, like do a lot of different things, find out what works for you, right? Um, but having some guidance while you do that, right, to kind of help you shape what do you really want to do, right? And kind of like direct, it's like very early on it's like a pyramid, right? Very early on, you're trying so many different things, but over time it kind of like converges, right? So you're still trying a lot of things, but there's more focus, it's around a specific thing. So that I think that like is very important, right, to have, and kind of answers part of your other question too, like should you, I think maybe the sense of like have, a focus or like focus on depth rather than breadth, right, and stuff. And then as regards like, having taste, right, craft. Now, I think that that's something that is very subjective, right? Like what taste and craft really means to you, right? So to me, for an engineer, having taste, right, is all about, I would say three things. So one is, the elegance of your solution. And that's just a big word for saying like how simple it is, right? So how simple how can you take like a big problem and break it down into something very simple, very clear, and solve it with your solution, your code, everything is like very simple. Anybody can look at this and understand it. You know, that's like that's the first part of it, of what defines taste for me as an engineer. Now, the other thing would be how well it does, the correctness of your solution, the efficiency of your solution. Is it fast? Does it, use resources efficiently, right? Like, does it use as little resources as possible to solve that problem, right? And is it simple, you know? So yeah, like always having that like at the back of your mind when thinking of how to solve this problem, right? When actually designing systems, right? When writing code. I think that these are the things that, define, you know, taste, right? Now, for whether junior engineers need to care about that very much, right? I feel like as a junior engineer, you're learning a lot of things. You're learning these things. A lot of things you don't know yet, right? But it's important to learn, right? And what's important to someone, kind of like so someone external, is especially like at that stage, right? Is saying that you did this. how much you try to make it simple and elegant and all of that stuff, right? It matters very much because someone like me, I can see an attempt, even if you don't really get it, right? I can see that you're trying.
Mhm.
And that matters. I know that it means that you're definitely learning some things, like maybe you learn solid principles and as a result, you try to apply them in your code, stuff like that, right? I can see that you're trying. It might not be perfect, right? But there's that step in the right direction that is going to be visible. And, that's something that you learn, you cultivate over time, you build, right? And, it kind of should also show in the progression, how you've been doing stuff over time. It shows, right? Yeah. So,
All right. So you definitely talked about how mentorship is very, very important, especially early on. Some of the things that define taste and craft, of which I do have questions around taste and craft. More questions about taste and craft coming up. But the things that define taste and craft, but also making an effort, right? Putting good work. It doesn't go unnoticed. Making an effort to making sure that whatever you build is improved. Even though you're a junior, you might not be looked at as having the best of the best skills, still being, considered, the quality of work that you put in. This is on the maybe flip side to mentors versus, the mentees, which is having managed engineering talent, junior engineering talent who are probably starting their careers at Mono, and you've been training them. Is there anything that you've learned from, hiring or training juniors that you think all mentors should definitely take into account if they were to, want to mentor juniors or they are mentoring one right now?
okay. So, I would say like the most important thing is knowing your responsibility as a mentor. And that's as a guide, right? As a mentor, your primary responsibility is to understand what does this person want to achieve, right? Like maybe they don't even know, right? And your job is to help them figure that out, right? And help them, you know, focus their efforts on achieving that thing or those things. So a big part of it is like, especially like the earlier you are, the more likely it is that you don't know shit. I got into software because I wanted to learn how to build games, right? I am building financial systems. Right. So, you probably don't know what you want to do very early on, right? It might just be like something sparks curiosity and, you get started and you play around with different things. I built mobile apps. Now I work like primarily backend, not primarily, entirely. Like I've not built like, at work, right? I've not written a single line of front end code in over 4 years, right? Now, that's not saying that I have not done that on the side, like, on like some toy project or something. And even when I do that, that's like maybe once in like, I don't know, in the entire 12 months. Yeah. Right. So I don't do that anymore. But very early on, I learned this thing, I used to do it. I mean, my role before Mono, I was a full stack engineer at Demos, right? So, and that was like a big part of my job. It wasn't just working on backend, but it was like full stack, right? Doing everything. um, so what I'm trying to say is you probably don't know what yet, right? So you want to kind of like test around, play around with different things and stuff as a junior engineer. Now, what a mentor needs to do for you at that time, and good thing I had a mentor, right, is to let you know that okay, this thing is good. It's nice. Like, what are you playing around with? Enjoy it and stuff. I mean, you actually need to enjoy tech anyway for you to, spend time, learning different things and stuff. I think you need to enjoy it. Okay. So, enjoy it and all of that. Right. But, this is what career looks like if this is what you focus on. This is what career looks like if you focus on this other thing. Right. You get to learn those practical things. It's like you can build anything you want to build. Right. Know that okay, this is what is important for if you want to go in this direction, right? And this is what is important if you want to go in this direction. And even though you like spend your time exploring and stuff, right? Getting that information kind of like helps you shape, okay, yeah, maybe you should focus on learning this, right? Rather than dabbling more into doing that other thing, right? That maybe you don't even enjoy as much as you thought. You understand? So, yeah, I feel like that's like, the important thing for mentors to know that their responsibility is to guide their mentees, right? To help them figure out what they want to do and then guide them towards like doing the things that would help them get there faster, right?
Right. So in summary, that would be supporting your mentee who might not even know what they want and even trying to figure that out and helping them be clear about what, the path looks like for them in that
Mhm.
career. Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing that. I will shift gears now a bit into, the engineering craft, as we've, sort of touched on a bit. First, excellent achievement. I saw your optimizing story from August. Very excellent achievement for everyone listening. I'm gonna link that in the show notes, so you definitely be able to find that. Well done for doing that. And right after I read the article, my initial thought was, could we have envisaged this sort of long before now, or do certain lessons, only emerge after you hit, certain goals? I'm curious if that, experience has led you to sort of adopt new ways of
Thinking
taking
about
up things. Oh, yeah, exactly. I wonder if that has helped change things a bit.
Yeah. So now, there's something else I was actually going to write about. I'm still like thinking, should I write about it or not, right? There was um, some other kind of optimization like that we did. Like we rebuilt one of our systems, right? Um, and you know, sometimes you make very intentional, conscious trade-offs. You know that this is the cost of this thing, but you are building for the now, right? You don't want to spend weeks building something, right, that does not have that value right now. There's this principle: you aren't gonna need it, right? It's like if you don't see the need in the next 1 year, right? Why build it? Like, why
Mm.
spend the engineering hours that you could be using to like build more important things, right? Why build that now? Maybe it's going to be useful 3 years down the line, but 3 years down the line, you can build it. you know, when you actually need it, you can actually build it then.
Mhm.
But you don't need to spend the time that you could spend like focusing on things that are more valuable to the business right now. Maybe if you did not do those things because of the sensitive nature, especially if you're working at a startup, right? If you don't do those things and ship those things now, you might not get to that point where you're actually in that thing in 3 years.
Yeah,
So
very true.
you need to be conscious of you need to know that you are actually making this trade-off, right? And then decide if you want to make that trade-off or if it is more important for you to actually like solve that problem now.
Do you think that this has showed up maybe in any of your sessions with juniors where it's like, okay, this doesn't matter now. It
Mm-hmm.
might make sense later. are, there, are there any specific examples that you are able to think of?
Mm, Let me see. Okay. So there's a system that I think in O there's a feature that we're trying to ship, or so it's I think something around the bill payments side, right? And currently that, I think that it's I'm trying to remember the specifics, right, of that particular situation. I know that that sentiment is something I held, right?
Right.
But I'm trying to remember the specifics of it. I think that there was like so he was going to spend more time, like trying to build a more complex, like resilient way to handle, failures and stuff like this, right? And it's like, okay, right now, this is what we need, you know, like this is what we need. We want this thing to be fast, right? We want to be able to have retries up to this, like in the case of failure, we want in the case of like say debit failures and stuff, right? We want to maximize TPV, right? We want to maximize like the total transaction volume. So if payments fails now because maybe NIMS is down or like the bank is down, maybe we can try it again, within like a short time and stuff like that, right? But also, if that doesn't happen, right? Like if the retry, right, doesn't happen, it is not critical, right? Like it's not like it has to happen, that kind of thing, right? The transaction can fail. You understand? We don't want to spend the time, focusing on that now before knowing that people need bill payment. If people need bill payment, we can, we can improve that process to like have more retries, process to say, okay, maybe your payment is not going through now, but we can do this for you like over the next 1 hour and manage the expectations and all of that, right? Building out that system that is not quiet, that is like, the user knows what's going on and all of that stuff. Now that's something that, from a product perspective sounds great, right? But do people actually even need this? You don't know. You understand? You want to validate it. So you validate it by doing like, okay, what's the simplest thing that also still ensures no money is lost, obviously, right? That stuff, there's something like, it has to be reliable and all of that. That's very important, right? But at the same time, you don't want to start building all the, okay, your payment is has not gone through now, but we can try again in like 2 hours, right? Stuff like that. Now, and like managing his expectations and all of that. That's new stuff that you're building. You don't want to go down that rabbit hole. You understand? So that's like one case where, we make the trade-off. Would rather ship this focused thing now, right? Than build this more complex solution, right? That people may not actually need, you know?
So that's very concrete where it's like you know that this might be useful, but you actually do make intentional decisions to not do those things for the
Mm-hmm.
reason that you don't even know if you get to the point where you need that more complex thing that you're trying to build out. So it might not be worth spending that time, that
Mm-hmm.
resources to try to build that out. No, thank you very much for saying that. And I think even outside of engineering, a lot of us have this like perfectionist view of our work where we want everything to be so perfect, want it to be so grandiose. And it's like that might actually not be necessary. And you might be spending so much time on things that, down the line you might realize that are maybe useless and not that useful.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much for that. You've talked a bit about these and figuring out what's useful for right now, what works and what's fast. I was having a conversation with a software engineer who said that taste is an intricate subject in engineering, right? In engineering, the first step is usually building something that works and doesn't annoy people, right? Building something that works and doesn't annoy people. First of all, do you think is this how you think about building at Mono as well, or is it a bit more granular where it's okay, build something that works, and then right after that, let's try to improve that. Or how does that show up in your own work?
Okay, good question. So, so the way we do things, right? It's like you're constantly like trying to balance speed and, you know, uh, like the effectiveness of your team. Like, are you delivering on the goals that, are important, right? So, whenever you're building any kind of system, you have like functional and non-functional requirements, right? Like these are the things that the product must do, and then these are the constraints that it has to operate under, right? Now, when you relax those non-functional requirements, right, sometimes you can relax them to, allow like certain things, So now consider this case. Now, this is a very simple case. It's not something that would actually happen, but just to like paint the picture, right? Implementing a system to like use just the database versus deciding where to like put a cache, right? So to optimize stuff, if you have a very strict non-functional requirements for like how fast the system responds, right? Then caching becomes uh critical, right? Otherwise you're going to fail to deliver on that requirement. But then it adds like you have to you have to figure out, okay, where does caching actually make sense for this, and stuff like that, right? And then implement it. Now you might decide ship this first with just the database, integration, right? No caches. Then come back and add caching later as you see that, okay, this is starting to be a bottleneck in the actual user experience, right? Aha. Then, in that, like, you are able to move faster without spending the time, doing like all of that stuff. It is good stuff, like the stuff is faster. Maybe your API would take like 300 milliseconds to respond before, or maybe it's going to take like 500 milliseconds to respond before. But now, because you've added caching, it takes 100 milliseconds to respond. That's like really good, but sometimes users might not even notice. You understand that stuff? It might not be that big. You understand? But if, say, for example, it's taking 2 seconds or 3 seconds, right, for something simple, then you know that, okay, yeah, you definitely need to do something because this users don't agree with this anymore. You understand? And then you come back and do that thing. You get that's kind of like a general idea of what that looks like at Mono. So it's like, yeah, you want to create the experience that works for users is very important, right? But the more important thing is that it does work for users, right? So it's like, okay, if this thing is needed to create the user experience that you need, then you definitely need to do that thing. You understand? But if it is like, okay, this solution would work well enough for what the users want, like they'll be happy with this, right? You could potentially improve it, right, by doing a Y thing, right, beyond even the level that users would be comfortable with, right? Now, the thing is, if you spend the time doing that thing, right, it is good, right? Users will get like an even better experience than what they expect, right? But you could have spent that time doing something else. You understand? So it's, you try to like figure out, okay, what makes sense for users, what is acceptable, like what can we ship now and not have to do that work, stuff like that.
Right. So between what you've just said now, I think also the last conversation that we had, this is mostly also developing a good sense of judgment as you go in your career and figuring out what does make sense for right now.
Yeah.
And making very smart and excellent trade-off.
Mm-hmm.
The next couple of questions are going to be ones that I got from junior engineers. So Modukpa included and Ebon Lua. So I'm really excited to hear
Mm-hmm.
your thoughts about this. So Modukpa has, a question around maintaining high standard and consistent quality, especially as, you may have spoken about this already, especially as you are managing you're managing a team in a very fast-paced environment. Do you have any sort of mind philosophy or actionable strategies that you take into account as you speak to your team, as you lead your team to deliver consistent results over the long term?
Okay. Yeah, I'll say like one of it is you know uh a management philosophy, in the sense like it's a key value at Mono. The I think it's like chase excellence or embrace excellence or something like that. Essentially, the point is aim for excellence in whatever you're doing, right? You know what you want to do, like you make sure you do it very well. You must that must be like central to you. You understand? You must actually do that. Now, how do we make that happen? One is to have that sense of, okay, this is what you want to do, right? You want to make sure you are doing the best you possibly can. The other thing is, how do we make that happen? At Mono, two things are very important. We do like we always like document stuff. If you're going to build anything, then it must be very well documented, right? And that's like from product, documenting the like writing PRDs and stuff, right? To engineers creating technical documentation that actually break down the low level details of how this is actually going to work, right? And then writing test and code review. So writing test does two things. One is it enforces correctness and all of that, right? So if you write good tests and the code doesn't work, right, then the test will catch the problem, right? So it enforces correctness, but it also enforces like high quality code. So it means that you are writing code that is if to write code that is easy to test, right? It means that you are writing like focused stuff. You don't have one method that is trying to do 1 million things, and as a result, your test now becomes very complex and have to write and have to read, right? So it forces you to actually build simple stuff. You understand? You think of how can you make this simple? For me, simple code is beautiful. Like the simpler it is, and it solves the problem, right? Like the more beautiful that is, it's very nice. Like short, simple, all of that. Yeah, that's good. And tests help, make that happen. The other thing is code reviews. Code reviews are like non-negotiable, right? Someone must review that code. You understand? And for juniors, someone senior must review that code, right? And it does two things. One is code reviews enforce like quality, also help to enforce like the correctness of what you're doing, because is the code that you have written, the code that is expected to be written, to run. Like, does it solve the problem, right? Are your tests good? Are they testing the code well enough that if I make a breaking change, right, will the tests break, stuff like that? Are you adhering to like the standards, like the style, how we write code? Or, you just like write it in some other way and it looks like someone copied something from somewhere and dropped it in the Or like does everything like, there's this kind of homogeneity that's, the system kind of should have, right? That everything looks good together, And you look at one part and it's clear, what it does. And then you look at the other part and, you know what that does too, right? Everything is simple and, everything kind of looks like the same set of people wrote these, right? Rather than, you look at this file and maybe it's correct, everything works, but it looks somehow. And then you look at a different file and it looks different in some sort of way, but it's also correct, right? So we also like enforce that that homogeneity, right? A lot of that is actually enforced like with linter rules and formatter and all of that. So to ensure that the like automation can help detect many of those things like
Right.
before you even like commit the code. But during code review, you're also looking for like that correctness, you're also looking for that style. There are certain things that maybe the linter cannot catch, right? Maybe it's not more about like the structure of the code, but maybe something about how you're actually doing something that's better, stuff like that. So yeah, reviews, a good test, and then that sense in your head of, okay, I want to do this in the best way possible. And
Right.
I'll say like one last thing, right, is still related to everything I've said, but is the sense that especially as a junior, you know that your code will not get merged if it is not good. You understand? Like, so just do the right thing. You understand? So it's like especially when people first join Mono, there's like, you make your first commit and then there's like 10 comments. And now the comments are not make you feel bad or like you're doing, because we have a very open culture. I've worked at places with very bad culture where you could lose your job because someone had a comment
Wow.
on your commit, like on your PR. But that's not how it's at Mono, right? Like it's very open. Every time the code review is like an opportunity to learn. So, and it's an opportunity for senior people to teach you, right? How to do things better and stuff. So, yeah, it usually gets to that kind of thing, like a learning opportunity. Right? But you have that sense. It will not get merged if you don't do it well. So just do it well. You get.
Right. So it looks like the general culture at Mono is choosing excellence, and there are different sort of systems that you have in place. Some of them intrinsic. So Definitely documenting. When you document, it forces you to make sure that the thing that you're doing works and it works well. It works in the most optimal way. So documenting is kind of a first thing. And I know that um there's this joke that lots of engineers don't enjoy the documenting process. But documenting code reviews, your code will be reviewed. Your code will be reviewed by someone senior, and you get a lot of feedback. But also, this one is the knowledge that you know that your code is going to get reviewed, and by so doing, it forces you to put in excellent work. So I think these are very, very core systems that you have in place. Thank you for sharing that. Um, Ebon has some thoughts around the future of software engineering. I know that this is a question that is on the heads of many people, to be honest. She's asking, what are your opinions with different software engineering opinions and technologies coming up constantly? How do you filter out sort of the noise? How do you determine what train is important to jump on? Which one is like, actually, this doesn't make sense? Yeah. How do you think about that?
Okay, that's a philosophical one, right? um, and I would there are two things I'm going to mention. One is obviously, the current thing, AI, right? And then like the general thing, like it's not the sense of there's always something new is not new. Like it's always happening, right? And you kind of have to, be able to discern, right? Okay, does this make sense? And does this not? So first thing is, as an engineer, you must know all the fundamentals, right? Okay. You must know the building blocks of whatever system that you need to build, right? So you're going to build an API, right? I think you should understand fundamentals of, TCP, HTTP protocol, right? You need to understand, like, this is fundamental. Anything that happens, you know,
It's
like
happening on top
top
of
of
it.
that,
It's not.
exactly, it's happening on top of that, right? You need to understand, like, at the lower level, this is what's really happening, right? That kind of gives you some kind of certainty, right? It's like in accounting, you have, this the most fundamental, in my opinion, equation that the entire of modern accounting is built on, right? Is that assets equals liabilities plus equity, right? And that equation is essentially like value is never, like, you never creating new value out of nothing, right? You're basically like moving value. That's the sense, right? Even when a company invents something, right, that value belongs to someone. You understand? So everything has an owner on the other side. So if anything is considered an asset, right, it's the net sum of liabilities and equity. Yeah, right. So that equation, right, is like fundamental. People build systems on top of that, right? Chart of accounts, all of that, right? Everything still comes back to, like, that's the basis of your ledger, right?
Mhm.
And everything on your ledger that can now, like, go into like building systems that actually make sense, like financial accounting systems that actually make sense for your specific business use case, right? Comes back to that thing. You understand? That's understanding of those fundamental concepts. You understand? It's like that in software as well. Like, there are fundamental concepts, the things that, drive, like, what are systems made of, right? You understand things like the cap theorem in designing systems. You know the specific trade-offs that you're actually making. You know that you're going to have to make these trade-offs, right? You know that networks will fail, nodes will fail. All of these things. These are like fundamentals. You know it. Regardless of what you build that system with, you use Kubernetes or you
Mhm.
don't, right? These are failures that will happen, and your system needs to be resilient enough to, like, handle that. Say there's new technology tomorrow that allows you to run applications in something else that is not Kubernetes or whatever,
Mhm.
you still have to understand this fundamental. If your application can run there, it's your code that's running there,
Right.
the system that it's running on can fail, right? It must send stuff over the network. So maybe you're going to make HTTP API calls, or you're going to make network calls with gRPC, or you're going to use GraphQL, whatever, right? These are like protocols built on protocols built on protocols, stuff
Right.
like that, right? So if you understand the most fundamental things, which are like important, then, you understand that that's like the most important thing for you to know, regardless of anything that's going on. You must know that, right?
Mhm.
Then you can now make a decision, on, okay, what's the other thing that you want to learn, right? Because, okay, there's this new thing. Definitely check it out. See if it looks like it's something that, does it fundamentally change something, right? Like, does it create new fundamentals that, that you think are interesting? You understand? Stuff like that. If it does, then that's something to now like explore the stuff. Okay, see blockchain, you know, making it possible for you to run code on untrusted systems. You don't trust the person that owns that node that they're going to, run that exact code that you have written, right, in your smart contract. But you trust the system because, you know, you can validate, you can be a part of the system that ensures that everything is correct and stuff. You know how all of this is done. Now, this is a new fundamental. You understand, right? Makes sense to learn it, right? And especially if you think that blockchain is going to, which it is going to like, kind of like grow in adoption and find like use cases that actually make sense and stuff like that, right? Then, then it makes sense to, you know, spend time learning this stuff. You understand? Similarly, now, AI is a thing. And, you know, it creates, I'll not say it creates fundamentals like in the same sense as, blockchain creates fundamentals, right? But it solves problems. Like, it helps you be faster, more efficient, you know, do research faster. Like maybe you'd have had to spend uh 30 minutes browsing, searching on Google and finding different things to get information. But now you ask Gemini or you ask ChatGPT and you get that information within seconds. Right. It doesn't replace the depth that maybe in going, because that the rabbit hole when you're doing some research and you find something and then you're learning about this and then you realize there's this other thing that you don't know,
Mhm.
and then you go down this hole of like trying to learn that and then realize something else that you don't know, and by the end of the day you have like 50 tabs open trying to like understand something, and a lot of that, like what you're going to get is like fluff, right? Like some of it is useful, some of it's maybe you've already seen it like 30 tabs before, but you're still seeing the same thing, stuff like that, right? So AI can help you kind of like focus, give you the information that you're looking for, and maybe depending on what you're looking for, it could be something that allows you to like, actually like dig deeper, understand things. And I feel like that's one of the, most important use cases for AI today. It's like, use it for learning, right? Use it to write code, but don't just trust code that that AI writes for you. Because obviously, just as you would not just trust code that some random person writes for you, just give them instructions to do that, right? You would not trust it. You would not integrate that into your system without properly reviewing that this thing does what it does. And of course, that means that you have to be very good at reviewing code, right? At reading code, understanding what this code does, and having a very good sense for what should this code be doing, you know so that you can actually like review that against, and then have a very good understanding of, things like security. Does this code create security vulnerabilities and stuff like that, right? So, but yeah, no problem using, even in what's the name, in our hiring process, right? I allow people to use, for their take home, right? Because I consider take-home as like a very important part of the hiring process. It's one of the things that filters out people that are passionate. Do you really want this job, or are you just looking for a job?
So you had shared about how everything that's considered as new right now isn't really new. It's just presented with shock and awe.
Mm-hmm.
But, the fundamentals will continue to be important, and everything that's, at least the majority of things that are getting built are built on top of the fundamentals.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you even need to use ChatGPT to write your code, you do need to know the fundamentals to be able to correct the things that ChatGPT has written, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Those continue to still be important. Where you should maybe then maybe get shaken a bit, or maybe try to definitely look into things and figure them out, is if they change the fundamentals, right? If they change the things that things are getting built on top of, then you should probably look into this and say, okay, this is interesting. How does this change how I work?
Yeah.
But a majority of all of that is you only be able to do all of these things if you know the fundamentals.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much, Alfawwaz. So this next question is more. You've talked a bit about AI and sort of some of its gains. But I would like to know if there are very, very profound impacts that AI has had on your work so far. We probably wants to steal this to make sure he 10x's his impact.
Okay. So for me, right, I'll say like AI has helped in two ways for me personally. So one is documentation, right? Often, you write stuff and there are blind spots, and you have this documentation review process, but people can still miss stuff, right? But you can save everyone a lot of time if your documentation is like more complete and all of that stuff, right? Now, AI can really help with that. You give it context, you give it instructions, you write documentation, you review it, you fine tune, you make changes, you kind of like break it down. So what I do is I give context first. Okay, this is the thing I'm trying to do, right? This is what kind of already exists, right? These are the constraints that this thing needs to operate under and stuff like that, right? And then, I have like a specific structure, of okay, this is an abstract, then this is how we like, refine the problem, right? So that we can correctly and accurately define the requirements for the system, and the requirements obviously are part of the documentation artifact that gets produced at the end of the day, right? So, you kind of like use this stuff to kind of, do those refinements. In the process, maybe you have like unanswered questions, things that actually maybe should not be, committed to the documentation yet, right? And you kind of have to like, get some information from someone and stuff like that. Basically just using it as kind of like a sparring partner to like figure out what needs to get done and stuff like that. And then using it to also like put things in the right structure, right, which you define anyway, but like you define the structure, you align on the content, and you get the documentation artifact.
Right.
I think about it. So there's that. I use that, right? And then the other thing is in tests, like writing unit tests, but not so much writing integration tests. Integration tests are a lot more complex and require the AI to have a lot more context, right, than unit tests do, because unit tests is testing like, just some small part of the code, right? On the other hand, an integration test is testing like integration systems. So usually I write those by hand, right? Because it's more complex. But for the unit test, I feel like AI does a very good job of being able to read the code, see how it works, and then write tests that validate that whatever this code currently is doing is the right thing. But that might not be the case in reality. So, which is why it's very important to read those tests. Now, if this test is setting up a case that doesn't make sense, or validating that something that doesn't make sense makes sense, you know that there's a problem in the test and there's a problem in the code, because it is the code that is using as reference, right?
Right.
Yeah. So, and that's something that it's also does, like it helps to kind of like a review before the review, right? Yeah, because we'll review it. But and before you submit code, in the spirit of excellence, right? You also want to make sure that you're submitting like the best possible thing, right? That solves the specific problem that you're trying to solve right now. Just having AI to help with that, right? It really does it does a good job of helping you figure out like what's
Right.
just improving on that stuff than maybe you would if you were not using AI at all.
Right. Got it. So AI does help you do some first hand review, first eye review, sometimes second eye reviews, and also with documentation to just save you that first step and catch things that you may not have caught.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you very. I think that's very concrete. And looking, you've joined Mono as a reverse engineer, and going into engineering, leadership. Would you say? Do you think that there are any, critical or strategic shifts that you made that you think accelerated that growth?
I'll say like the most important thing like that has impacted my growth at Mono is ownership, right? Like taking ownership of my work, right? So I have this thing. If I am involved in something, it must not fail. Like no, honestly, like personally, that's something very personal to me. It's like if okay, I am part of this thing, then it must work. Like I have to make it work. Like that's really just it, right? So when I'm given responsibility for something and I own it, I make it becomes very personal, and it's like this thing just has to, it just has to be done. It just has to work. All of that stuff, right? And that gets recognized, obviously, right? Because constantly that mindset helps you constantly like create impact and stuff like that, right? And when you I think that's really it, right? And like it's just more responsibility and more responsibility, and when responsibility like is added, and I think, okay, how do I make this work? Because it must work now that my name is on it. Right. So yeah, that's how it really has been. And obviously, it's a lot of learning because it's like at different levels, right? There's like you have different focus. You have from basically building reverse engineering applications and building integrations to now like leading a team to managing the entire engineering team at Mono, right? And like going from building specific parts of the system and building integrations does not mean I'm building stuff on the dashboard, or I'm building many parts of the system, right? Like there's a lot of the system that's not just integrations. You understand? And I started building integrations, right? So all of those things were kind of like out of scope for me. I did not have to think about them, right? Like this is it. So, growing, like getting more responsibility means like more scope. You now have other things that you're building that, you kind of have to like know, right? And, it must work, right? So it means you have to make sure that you understand how it works and how to ensure it continues to work, and whatever needs to get done, how to make sure like that gets done. You need to learn that, right? And as you grow in leadership, like there's people involved now. It's like it's no longer you and your work, right? It's like how do you exactly? So how do you create? How do you influence other people? And regarding influence, I'll say like it's a thing of like how much value do you create for those other people? You understand? So if I mean, definitely like when you are already in that position of leadership, there's some kind of like expectation that naturally comes, right? Like, I'm your team lead. There is certain things that, you naturally expect, right? Okay, I set the direction for X, right? And now I'm like, I naturally am the one that would do it. It's not a thing that I'm trying to prove that I can do that, or, stuff like that, right? So I'm not doing something to influence my peers. In that case, it's like, okay, I set the tone for this thing. I mean, that doesn't mean that I do that like in isolation, obviously, but you get the idea. Like the final responsibility of that comes to you. You get like, but especially like growing, right? You don't suddenly get to that point, it actually starts with you demonstrating those like behaviors, right? And competencies. Like you show that you know what it takes, right? And you actually start creating that influence. And how do you do that? Like by, you know, by adding value, right? Like it could be this, library that you wrote. It could be this information that you found and then you shared with everybody. So everybody is now aware, you know. It could be how you approach like code reviews for your peers, right? And they see that, your reviews help to make their code better, like each of these things create value, right? And that value gets seen because you are enabling everybody to be better, you know? So, and that's what is going to like get you to that next level. And then at the next level, now, you have like, you have people that are junior, you have people at the same level, and you have people that are still like senior, right? There's people that you report to, and so you get new peers, right? You get like so the your position in the hierarchy changes, right? And you have to like learn all of that again. Okay, what value can you add to like the people at your level? How do you have new responsibility, right? How do you ensure that everything keeps going very well and all of that stuff? So obviously lots of learning, but obviously like the correct mindset, right? Influence people like positively, right? Like by creating value and have that sense of it must work. So that when things when things don't work, you're responsible for it.
Right.
That kind of thing.
So it looks like the lessons are definitely extreme ownership, right?
Hmm.
This is in your care. You have to take it on. And take whatever comes at you with it. And I had like a product manager from Google, and she said the same thing, which is that it gets to a point where there's a point where if certain things are not getting done and you realize they are not getting done, it's your job to figure out how they get done,
Hmm.
right? Whether that is spelled out clearly to you or not, it gets to a point where it is your job to figure out how that gets done and gets done well. So extreme ownership. And you kind of even answered my next question. I was going to ask, if someone were to want to reach your position or like get to a senior level, what are some key things that they must do? So it looks like extreme ownership, and the ability to influence people, and influence for that to be possible, they have to trust you, they have to trust your leadership. Is there anything else that you add about for you to get to a very senior position? These are table stakes. That these are things that you have to have.
The things I've mentioned, but there's also luck.
Very important.
There's also luck, right? Like luck also plays a factor because you could be stuck doing something that's not as important to the organization. You're not going to get really far. And it's not because of anything. It's just because it's not important. It's not that important to you. If you find yourself stuck in that kind of a thing, you should probably like go somewhere else where you can create more impact. So when you get a role, like you're thinking, what is the pinnacle of this? Say I kept growing in impact, right? What would it look like for me 5 years down the line? So if you like what that is, what that looks like, then yeah, sure, of course, keep doing it. Otherwise, maybe go somewhere else.
Right. So maybe look towards the impact, or maybe chase impact, and what that might have in maybe users, the organization, type of impact that might have in the organization. And that comes with a lot of growth. So luck is a very tiny is a piece that does help accelerate that progress. So
Hmm.
we're jumping into the lightning round. So very quick questions. If you had to teach engineering for 5 minutes, what's a principle you must cover?
Hmm.
This is non-negotiable. You must cover this.
Hmm. I'm trying to think if I mean if we're talking about like software engineering in general, then I think that what I just mentioned is probably like the thing, like build systems that can, solve the problem and withstand any kind of failure. You know, that's like that's the only way to build systems, right? It's like the system will fail, like parts
Right.
of the system will fail. But when that happens, you still need to make sure that, you know, you are creating the system does what it needs to do, and it does it to the level that it needs to do that at, right?
Right.
If you want users to be able to buy stuff on Amazon, right, then I should be able to buy stuff on Amazon, regardless of whatever is happening. And, if something like very catastrophic happens and stuff, right, your system is able to recover from that quickly.
Okay. Thank you very much for that one. So this one is sort of on the flip side of what I know many might be expecting, which is there any non-core engineering skill that you think has made you a better engineer yourself, has made you a better manager yourself? Apart from the technical, definitely knowing how to write good code.
Well, I mean, apart from the code, it's the people, right? It's like in anything you do, like whether you are a software engineer or you need to be good with people, Like, I mean, some of it is very hard to like crystallize in words or like, put into words, right? In, how I say like I'm able to relate with people well, right? And some of that is like being able to communicate well. Some of this was not always good. Some of this I developed over time, like how to communicate well with people at different, like in different situations at different levels and stuff like that. Right. So, but this is something important, right? Being able to. So one is, okay, you're good with the tech, like you're strong technically. But the other thing is you need to be good with people as well, right? So you need to be able to learn from people, impact people, communicate people, influence people to do the things that you want them to do. Yeah, that's it. Like be good with people and, be strong technically. I think that those are the things.
Right. It's the people that move the product. So definitely be good with people and not just, the technical skills. But that is all the questions that I have for you today.
That's it, folks. I hope you found this useful. Thank you for tuning in and staying till the end. Let me know what you think in the comments and who you'd like to see on the pod. Don't forget to like, follow, subscribe wherever you're listening from, or share with someone in your network who might find this useful. That's all for now. I'm Emmy, and I'm gonna see you next time.